Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. A lot of you probably been seeing in your feeds reports about Elizabeth Olsen being cast for House of the Dragon Season 2. So I'll explain what that is, what she's reportedly being cast for, and how that's going to fit into the story. Really cool deep cut, some of you might remember too. Elizabeth Olsen actually auditioned for Daenerys Targaryen alongside Emilia Clarke. Obviously wound up losing out because we got Emilia Clarke Daenerys. So all this talk of coming back to House of the Dragon is like coming back to the source. If you're brand new to the channel, I'm doing videos for all the episodes, just like I did for the main Game of Thrones episodes. Be sure to subscribe to get them all. We're also doing a giveaway for HBO Max subscriptions. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and just post all your theories in the comments below. Who should she play?
For the night is dark and full of terrors.
But if you haven't seen the news in your feeds this morning, reportedly HBO is talking to Elizabeth Olsen about joining the cast of Season 2. It doesn't say exactly who they're looking at her for. A lot of people are talking about her playing a young version of Melisandre. I'll explain why and how Melisandre's timeline works into the events of House of the Dragon. Because if you remember the original series, they explain Melisandre uses a gem to glamour herself. She's actually 400 years old later in the timeline, and that's a little under 200 years in the future, meaning that she's still closer to like 200 years old when the events of House of the Dragon take place, so she's already pretending to be much, much younger. Next to the dragons themselves, she's like the oldest living thing in Game of Thrones. A really good example is Balerion the Black Dread. He lives till he's about 200 years old and then dies of natural causes. The dragons just continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger as they get older. That's why the older ones are the biggest. Like Vhagar is currently the biggest dragon on House of the Dragon. During the first couple of episodes, they've had a lot of Easter eggs for the main Game of Thrones episodes, especially Aegon's prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire, the prince who was promised, like literally mentioning Jon Snow's character, because he is literally a Song of Ice and Fire, because his parents are Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark.
From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
There are other really old characters during the events of Game of Thrones that can connect some of the events that happened in the past, but this far in the past, currently Melisandre is the only one who's alive at this point in history. We're about 112, 113 AC. The events of Season 1 of Game of Thrones picks up just after 300 AC. The other oldest character during the events of the main series is the Three-Eyed Raven, and his real name was Brynden Rivers. He was a big part of the Blackfyre rebellions, but those actually don't take place, like he isn't born till way later in this timeline. Like well after the Dance of the Dragons. So the only way they could feature Bran, for instance, or the Three-Eyed Raven that we saw during the Game of Thrones series would be for them to show up viewing the events in the past, like do their weird version of time traveling where they're kind of viewing the past, but they're not in the past technically. It's kind of like their spirit using the weirwood trees to see into the past, which is how they're able to influence characters like Hodor. That's how Bran is able to mess Hodor up, basically. But the way it works in the books is that they can only do that weird time traveling when they're near weirwoods. It has something to do with the way the Children of the Forest power works. And when they're doing that, it's called green sight. Green seers are also like a rare form of Children of the Forest in other people. It's like 1 in 100,000 people are born with the ability. That's how rare it is. They refer to Bran as the last green seer. But the thing with Elizabeth Olsen playing a younger version of Melisandre is that she was very active during this period in Essos in the Red Temple. Within the book story that they're adapting for this series, there aren't any maesters who actually wrote the story itself, like that's where we're adapting from, who knew whether or not the king or anyone else who potentially knew Aegon's prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire, the prince who was promised, the long night, talked to anyone else from any other continents like Essos about the prophecy itself. Because the maesters themselves didn't know it because it was a secret. Aegon never told anyone but his heirs. That's why the first time we're hearing about it is House of the Dragon Episode 1, and it's George R. R. Martin writing that backstory in. And he's basically saying the book that I actually wrote about this was written by other people who were taking down accounts of other people themselves who just witnessed events from afar. So the people actually writing this history down were not privy to secrets like Aegon's prophecy here. The way Aegon had the prophecy is that he had a dragon dream, and that's specific to the Targaryen family here, but that's also a way of describing visions of the future. Daenerys has dragon dreams in the House of the Undying, seeing visions of the future in the Long Night, a bunch of different things. She sees a lot of things in the House of the Undying. But like Melisandre has her own version of that when she stares into the flames, like Varys stares into the flames and he says he hears a voice calling out from them. And she claims that it was the Red God speaking to her, showing her a vision of this potential Long Night future. So just because we've seen these particular people that know about the secret doesn't mean that there aren't other people out there that have also had visions of the future in one way or another. So it just provides the wiggle room here for other people outside of the line of succession for the Iron Throne to know about this and be talking about it during the events of the series. And going back to the beginning of the story that we know for her so far, the whole reason why she came to Dragonstone in the first place was because she was looking for Azor Ahai, the vision given to her inside the flames of this potential long night. It's just that when she first came to Dragonstone, she believed it was Stannis because that was at the beginning of the events of Season 2. Both times she came to Dragonstone sensing that the prince who was promised would be at Dragonstone. She was correct, she just came a little bit early. So technically she was right, but it wound up being Jon Snow. He didn't come to Dragonstone until much later. That's why after they suffer many defeats with Stannis, like she tries to use her power, believing him to be the one, and they just continually fail over and over again, and she's kind of dejected until she's able to use the Red God's power to raise him from the dead. And once that happens, then he eventually goes to Dragonstone and she believes that it is him. He came back from the dead, it has to be him. And that's basically been her life's mission, so after 400 plus years of being alive, that's why she collapses dead after the end of the Long Night, after they kill the Night King. As if she used her power, her connection to the Red God, the boon granted to her by him, to keep herself alive that long, and that's why she's lived so long. And also why you don't have tons and tons of people living that long who are followers of the Red God. Like, why don't all the Red Priests live that long? It's just a way to show you that there is magic within the world of Game of Thrones, and even though George R. R. Martin never fully explains it, it is meant to be a thing. So it's a way of showing you that she has a special connection to the power of the Red God that the other Red Priests don't. There's a lot of theories that the gods in Game of Thrones are all really the same source of power and people are just tapping into it in different ways. Like, is the Red God the true god, or are the Seven the true gods? I think a little bit of it's inspired by the idea that in the real world you have a bunch of different religions all worshiping similar figures, and they just have different ways of describing these similar figures and their backstories. So when Melisandre is tapping into the power of the Red God, it really is like the same type of power that the Children of the Forest draw on, the same power that Bran is now drawing on. And because the White Walkers were created by the Children of the Forest, they're tapping into the same type of old power. There isn't a ton of information in the books about Melisandre's early life, but she was born into slavery in the Far East in Asshai. Her name when she was born was Melanie. She was part of what was called Lot 7, sold to the Red Temple at an early age. And cool connection back to Aegon the Conqueror, if we're talking about Aegon's conquest, we're like at 110, 112 AC or so right now where the show is taking place. Melisandre would be close to 200 years old during the events of House of the Dragon, meaning that she's way older, like she far predates Aegon the Conqueror even, making her closer to the same age as Balerion the Black Dread, meaning that she would have been alive during the time of old Valyria. So like, Viserys says that Balerion the Black Dread is the only living thing that remembered or had memories of ancient Valyria. That's not true, because Melisandre would have been alive in that part of the world. Slightly different country, but her activities as a Red Priestess would have taken her all over Essos, so she would have run into other Valyrians during that time. There are way more followers of the Red God in Essos, so there are Red Temples in a lot of the major cities in Essos. We haven't really spent a lot of time in Essos in the series yet. Most of the other stuff outside of Westeros that we've seen so far is happening in the Stepstones, and that's down here, kind of in between Essos and Westeros. The main Red Temple, where the Fiery Hand are based out of, is in Volantis, so that's where the High Priestess of the Red God is. We saw the High Priestess during the events of Game of Thrones. She comes to Daenerys and Meereen talking about similar things that Melisandre is talking about when she was talking to Stannis and then eventually to Jon Snow.
Daenerys has been sent to lead the people against the darkness, in this war, and in the great war still to come.
Do you remember what you heard that night? You heard a voice call out from the flames. Should I tell you what the voice said? Should I tell you the name of the one who spoke?
So a lot of Melisandre's backstory is just spent practicing her arts. So because there's very little documentation about Melisandre's early life, it's just always possible Elizabeth Olsen could be playing a version of that character, and it gives them a lot of wiggle room because George R. R. Martin is also helping them write the story. So George R. R. Martin and the showrunner said that when they did the House of the Dragon series, they wanted to make the show be like the true version of events because they wanted to show you what really happened during these events. Whereas in the books, it's more of like a history tome, kind of like the Silmarillion. Like George R. R. Martin himself makes some jokes calling it the G-Marillion because it's kind of a history tome, like first this happened to this person, then this happened. Whereas on the show, it's much more of a longer narrative where you just kind of see people's lives play out, but you're actually watching it happen. So we get to see the true version of events. It just makes it a lot easier for George R. R. Martin to write new material for Melisandre's backstory or for backstory relative to other Red Priests. It is always possible that they're looking at Elizabeth Olsen to cast as someone who's native to Westeros. She's a fantastic actress, but I have a little bit harder time seeing her play just like a regular person as opposed to playing someone who's part of the Red Temple. When I first saw the news, I actually thought she was almost a little too famous. Like, wow, famous person inside Game of Thrones. She seems a little bit big for them to cast. But like Matt Smith, for instance, is a good example of them casting a very well-known actor in a high-profile position. The funny thing about this, too, is that Carice Van Houten, the person who played Melisandre in the original Game of Thrones series, was like, hey, Melisandre is still alive. Shouldn't she cameo during this series at some point? Like, she was trying to get herself onto House of the Dragon. My full House of the Dragon Episode 3 video will post Sunday just like normal. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. Everyone click here for my full House of the Dragon Episode 3 trailer video, and click here for my full House of the Dragon Episode 2 video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.